Let's go. Good afternoon, everyone. Someone asked me in this group that I should say hello to Bill. I think he's in California. We're glad to have you, and all the rest of you, too, who are listening in. Well, today we're going to talk about the prodigal son. I think the parable is wrongly named. I think it should be called the loving father, because the prodigal only takes care of one of the sons in the text, and we have to take care of both of them. And the major theme of what this is all about is the loving father who's waiting to welcome both of his sons. I have to make a little statement of confession and say where this story is for me, this parable. It's become more and more a part of my life and my faith and my spirituality as every year goes on. My wife says you've probably quoted the prodigal son in your sermons for 50 years more than any other parable. And I think it sticks in my craw so strongly because of the way the father runs to accept the son and all those things that go into grace and understanding and acceptance. So I thought I'd tell you a little story to start with about the hymn Amazing Grace. A number of years ago, Tom Brokaw did a hour presentation on the hymn Amazing Grace on public television. And he interviewed such people as Johnny Cash and Judy Collins, who were all singers, and they were all there for him to do this. So he finally asked them what line in the song was most powerful for them and drew them into wanting to sing it. And they said, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." And he asked them why that drew them in and what that meant to them, that it saved a wretch like me. And all of a sudden, the camera moved in on all the singers that were there, and they just were staring out like into space to try to recall those moments in their life where they had those kinds of experiences, to see where that was. I think that's how it is with us when we take the faith seriously. For a moment, we just kind of have to be like we're staring into space, trying to figure out how all things are. I think this time of the pandemic does that for us more than ever. I just read the Christian Century, and there were 5 articles on how you grieve, and talked about the experiences of people who are in the whole process of grieving and what that means for them. And the interesting thing that just kind of sparks my attention is we have these, all these people that have died, but you have to multiply that sometimes 2 to 5 of the people it affects and the families and the lives who grieve. This is a catastrophic event. And it's an event that our faith has to address, and without our faith, I'm not so sure that we could deal with this. So I'm grateful for the hymn Amazing Grace. It's one of my favorites. So how has the parables shaped our lives? We go back, we started a few weeks ago by Peter asking the question, how many times? 7 enough times to forgive my neighbor. And then the parable is told about the fellow who owns billions of dollars and is forgiven that debt. And then we come to the realization, well, is that big number there because of God's forgiveness? And then we discover that it isn't a big enough number. There isn't any number you can put on the depth and height and of God's grace and his love and his forgiveness. And then we have those 2 wonderful parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin. And I think one of the great things about those parables that hit us and kind of shape and mold my faith in life is how they never stop looking until they found it. Which reminds me that God never stops looking for us when we get lost. He never stops looking for us till he can love us and be with us and see where all of that is for us. And there was a risk with leaving the sheep. There's said nothing in the text that there was someone else to take care of him or any dogs or anything. So you leave 99 to go after one, and if you and I are the one that's lost, he's going to be there for us. So then we come to this parable for today. Need to tell you, Henry Nouwen, a Jesuit priest who taught at Harvard and Notre Dame, and has written more books than I can count about spirituality, and has been a big help to me in my theology and in my spirituality. I highly recommend him. And he took 2 months off his life, and he went to Leningrad in Russia. There's a museum there that has Michelangelo's painting of the prodigal son. He sat there for, I think it was 6 weeks or 2 months every day, and meditated for a couple hours on that painting. The painting consisted of the prodigal and the father welcoming him, and in the background was the elder son. And there was the robe and the ring and everything else that goes with that. And he wrote this book from that called The Prodigal Son, which is worth its money to buy and to see all the depth of what Nouwen saw in this amazing God who accepts us by grace and unconditionally and gives us a second chance and a new beginning. So let us read this text from the 15th chapter of Luke. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to hear him. The Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." And then we go to verse 11 in the 15th chapter. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Give me my share of the property that belongs to me." So he divided his property between them. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to the distant country, and there he squandered his property in wasteful living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine came and took place throughout the country, and he began to be in deep need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him any. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to eat and some to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion, and he ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slave, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And I'll get the fatted calf and have it killed. Let us eat and celebrate and have a party. For this son of mine who was dead is alive again. He who was lost is now found.' And the celebrating began. Now his elder brother was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard the music and the dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked, 'What in the world is going on?' He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he came back safe and sound.' Then he began to become angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your commands. And yet you have never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. When this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "All that is mine is yours, but we have to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life, was lost, and now has been found." And to keep with the tradition, let me read from Buttrick's translation of the prodigal son. Now the tax collector were all crowding around to hear him. The Pharisees and the scribes murmured and were upset. "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons. The younger of them he divided the estate among them. Not many days later, getting everything together, the younger son went off to the far country and squandered his estate on high and wasteful living. Having spent everything he had, a severe drought swept through the land, and he began to become in deep need. He went and hired out to one of the citizens of the land, who sent him out to the fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his belly on the husks which the pigs ate, but nobody gave him any. When he was off by himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have plenty of bread, while I am dying of drought? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and your sight. I no longer should be called your son. Make me one of your hired hands.' So getting up, he went to the father. When he was still a long way away, the father saw him and was moved with pity. Running, he embraced and kissed him warmly. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against you and against heaven, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his worker, 'Quick, bring the best robe, dress him, put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Get the fatted calf, kill it, let's have a party. Because this son of mine was dead and is now alive, was lost and is now found.' And they began to celebrate. But his older son was in the field, and he came in near the house. He heard the music and the dancing, and he called over one of the boys and asked him what was going on. And the boy said, 'Your brother has arrived, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got back in good health.' He was angry and did not want to go in, so the father came out and pleaded with him. Answering, he said to his father, 'Look, I've worked for you all these years and never disobeyed one of your orders, and you never gave me as much as a goat so I could party with my friends. But when this son of yours, having used up his inheritance with whores, shows up for him, you kill the fatted calf.' The father said to him, 'Dear child, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But it is right for us to celebrate and be glad, for this brother of yours was dead and lives again, lost and is now found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Well, that's it. Once I rewrote this parable in contemporary language, and I'll share that with you. There are a bunch of people in the church who thought they were pretty good, better than everyone else, and they kind of had a judgmental attitude about them. And when they heard Jesus speaking that he spent time with outcasts and sinners, they were upset. So Jesus tells them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger son wanted his inheritance, so he said to his dad, "Why don't we pretend that you're dead and give me the inheritance?" So he took his inheritance and went off to the far country. He went to Chicago. And he went to Rush Street, where all the excitement and parties are and all the bars, and I suppose you could find a prostitute here or there on Rush Street. And he was the hit of all the bars. I think he even went into Harry Carey's bar. And pretty soon his money ran out. And you know, if you buy drinks for everybody and you don't have any more money to buy drinks for people, they don't want anything to do with you. Plus, you add to that a drought and famine came. And he didn't have anything to do, so he went out and got a job feeding pigs. That had to be the lowest thing a Jew could do. And as he was feeding the pigs, there were these pods, and no one even gave them. Pods were the kind of roughage for the pigs, and some poor people, when they really got poor and desperate, would eat the pods. So he said to himself, well, you know, he came to his senses a little bit, and he said, he's not a dummy. He said, you know, those hired hands that work for my father have 3 square meals a day, and they have left over. They eat better than I do. I'll go home and I'll say to my father, how could I say that I would sound really religious? Oh, I know what I'll say. I said, I've sinned against God and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. He did not want to go home and be his full status as a son before. He just wanted to go home and be a laborer. So he hitchhikes back from Chicago. And Dad's on the porch. You know how it is when you have kids and they're coming home late at night, or they've been away and you're worried about them? You either pace the floor or sit and look out the window, wondering if they're going to get home safe and sound. Well, he's been doing this for years. There he's sitting on the porch with his cane because he has an arthritic knee. And he sees this car stop out by the mailbox. And he rubs his eyes and he looks and he said, that looks like my son. And then he looks a little closer and sees that it is, flips his cane down and runs, if you can mind that, down to greet his son. And he said, this son of mine who is dead is now alive, who is lost is now found. And the son begins to tell his story about how he sinned against God. Before he even gets the story done, the father says to the servants, go get a robe, that special one that's mine, and the ring, put it on his finger, and get sandals, because we want to tell the whole neighborhood that this son of mine is back and we have restored him as a son. And then go get the fatted calf, and we'll have a party. In those days, they didn't eat the fatted calf unless it was a family gathering. Either it was a special season of the church year, or it was a wedding, or it was a reunion. It was saved for those kinds of things. So that's what they began to do. And then there was the elder son, and he was out in the field. He said to one of the boys around, what's all that commotion down at the house? All that singing and dancing and stuff. Well, your brother has come home safe and sound, and your father has killed the fatted calf for him. Well, now you know, the elder brother was raising that calf for the county fair, for the 4-H. And that was special to him. It wasn't only that they just didn't use the calves, but it was his own calf. And he got upset. And so he talks to his father, but he doesn't call him father. He says, listen, I've been here all these years, and I've worked and obeyed and done everything you've told me to do. I've been the obedient child, and you never even gave me a goat for a party with my friends." And the father says to him, "I've always been here for you. I've always loved you. I want you to come up to the house." And he turns to him and he doesn't call him brother. We should note this. He says, "That son of yours has been out doing wild living, even being with prostitutes and whores, and you throw him this great party." And the father says to him, "You've always been my son. I love you." We don't know. We don't know what happened to the elder brother. I think Jesus tells that parable because you have to make a decision. The decision is for you. What do you wish for the elder brother? What do you think God's grace and love has done for him? And what has that done for you? Well, let's take a look. Well, I should tell you one more story about this text. My favorite preacher, and who many considered at the end of the 20th century to be one of the greatest Protestant preachers, was a great teacher of preachers, and I studied under him about 4 or 5 times. Fred Craddock, he's now died. After he had done a very successful job teaching at Columbia Seminary and for years and spoke at many places, he retired and he took a little church in Georgia with about 40 members and said, "I want to figure out how that is that you work with a few people." And then he did a lot of extra writing. But in one of his sermons on the prodigal son, this is how he tells the story. He starts out by saying there was this neighborhood with a long street, houses on both sides, way up and down. And a man went out in the street and he said to his neighbor, "What's all that noise and what are all those cars doing down there at that house?" "Well," he says, "I guess that son who took his inheritance from his dad and left and went to the..." "You mean that one that went off to the city, did all that living and wild stuff and embarrassed his father and the family? You mean they're having a party for him? What in the world is wrong with them? Are they nuts? Why would they accept him back? He's nothing but a scoundrel and a bum." He says, "Why do you think they would accept him back?" And the neighbor turns to him and says, "I think the father loved him. I think the father loved him." So the question that Craddock raises, if we were a neighbor in this neighborhood, would we go down to the party if we were invited? Would we go back to welcome this bum back? Or would we rejoice like the father that he's returned safe and sound? What would he do with all that? Well, let's take a look and analyze each one of these characters in the story. Sometimes when it's the young one who's, we have Cain and Abel and we have Esau and Jacob, and the young one always seems to be the one that gets the prize in the end, and we kind of root for the underdog, don't we? So what is our feeling towards this prodigal? Well, I think we have to look at a little bit what he's done to the family. I think it's not out of the ordinary to say that he says to his dad, "Let's pretend that you're dead, because I want the inheritance." And that was not the procedure that happened. The father wasn't even sick, wasn't even close to death, but he wanted his share of the money. So they divided it up. And in the dividing of that up, the way he treated his father was really kind of an insult to the family and to his father and to the family name, and all that happened. And then he destroyed the relationship between his father and himself by going off this way and with his brother. It brought a radical change to that whole family. They had to explain this to the community, and the community knew that. And this kind of action has to redefine how this whole business is of community and relationships. So we find that I think you have to paint a picture of him not being a very good son. Because the power of the story is found in the unconditional love that the father has for the son. Now the elder brother, who is, who's out in the far country taking care of the sheep, has a different understanding of relationships. You think relationships should be based in families on merit and on what you do, or on love? There's a real difference, isn't there? I'm going to earn my love. You've got to love me because I do this. Or are relationships based on the whole business of you love them just the way they are? You stop loving your children and your friends and your family if they do something wrong? Does God do that? How are we with all of that? The elder brother, one could say, is kind of into himself. He's not interested in anybody else. When he addresses the conversation with his father about his brother, he never calls him brother. He says, this son of yours. He wants to distance himself from that. And when he talks to the father, he doesn't address him as father. He just simply says, listen, this is what it's about. And so he stays in the far country, and he's kind of judgmental before his brother to see where they are and where all of that is and how that works out for him. But let's move back to the father. This story is not basically about two sons. It's about a father. It's about a father who has two sons, and he loves them both. He goes out to the elder brother and tries to encourage him to come in and tells him that he loves him. He says to him, I'm going to give you everything I've got. When the money is divided between two sons in Jewish families at that time, the older brother would get 2/3 of the estate, and the younger brother would get 1/3. So the older brother is going to get more than the younger brother got. And then the father says to him in this marvelous way of love, I'm going to give you everything that I have. So the father gives up everything. He gave up part of his inheritance to the younger son, and the rest he's given to him. And so his love says, I have to give up everything. Is that not what Jesus did for us on the cross? Did he just go part the way to show us that he loves us and wants to forgive us? Or did he go all the way? And how do we respond to that? Where is your movement? Is your movement away from God or towards God? When you hear these stories in the scripture, do these stories move you away from God, or do they move you towards God? Fred Craddock says you can't stay in the same place. Because when you're in the same place, the world of sin and brokenness attacks you, and you either have to move to be away from God or you have to be moved towards God. Your life as a follower of Jesus is always moving with God, always moving where God is. So what is your movement in life? What do these parables do to us so they can kind of see where we're coming from? I think the picture that I get from this parable that just sticks in my mind is I see the father running off the porch down to greet his son. He doesn't wait for the whole confession. I don't even know if he listened to it. He just is so glad that he's back, and he gives him. Where in your life, in your faith imagination, do you see God running to you? When you've done something really seriously wrong, do you picture that God's forgiveness is God coming to run to you and throw his arm around you and said, "You're still my child, and I love you"? And when you think about your death, do you think about the fact that when Jesus sees you coming, he's just going to sit there and pause? Well, which is this one? Is this the Schoonover that acted up badly? Or do you think that you see him running, saying to you, "Welcome home. Welcome into the most important stage of your life, to be with me and other people in heaven"? I just love that phrase, that God runs out to him and sees him to see where he is, to see that important point of what it is. And then to give away everything you have in order that you might restore this person to who God made him to be. There are two things that I think are important for us to help understand this story. The one is the party. The parable of the lost sheep and the coin and the prodigal son are all in the 15th chapter and fit together. They're all about something that's lost and found. And evidently, according to Jesus telling of the parable of the prodigal son, that business of lost and being found and dead is now alive has some real depth to it. He first says, "This son of mine was dead and is now alive, was lost and is now found." And I believe, as some believe, that he's saying that there's something worse than death and there's something more important than being alive. There's something that's worse than that, is to be lost. The prodigal son was lost. He was lost his way. He had lost what it meant to be a family member. He had lost what the meaning of life was. And then he was found by the father when he came home. The elder brother was also lost. He was lost in a life all by himself. He was lost in a life that he thought relationships were based on what you did, not the fact that you were loved. And so there is something more about being lost and being found. Some days we get lost. I think there have been moments through this pandemic that I have felt lost. Lost amongst all what's going on for so many people, and lost with the way that we failed to respond to do the things we could to help people's lives. Lost in the sense that sometimes I wonder how long this is going to go on. Maybe to be found is to have a vaccine, but maybe to be really found is to know that God is still in charge, and that God is with us, and that he loves us, and he is a part of us, and that he accepts us. I think too often, what would it mean for a church to have a party about being accepted by grace and being loved unconditionally and being forgiven unlimitedly. What kind of party should we have? Maybe part of the party is when we come and celebrate Holy Communion. The other part of that Holy Communion is we take seriously what God has done for us. But is to party and celebrate life part of our response to what God has done on the cross and what Jesus Christ does for us? And if you don't like the word party, you could celebrate life and just be grateful and thankful that you're alive and you have each other and you have this blessed place to live and you always have a God who is here for you and always comes to you and will never abandon you. You know, I think this grace that God gives us and his love is so extravagant that we can't even begin to imagine it. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus tells the short, single kind of parable about you can't put new wine into old wineskins. Because if you put new wine into old wineskins, it'll burst and ruin everything. New wine has to go into new wineskins. There is a sense that you can't contain all the grace and love and forgiveness that God gives us. It needs to be there to spill over into our lives, so much so that we can't help but want to share that with one another and to see where they are. So, any of you want to share what you think this story is about? For you? Being lost or being found? Or what story in the Bible is the one that motivates you most? I guess I'd ask the question, what parable motivates you the most or gives you the clearest picture of God? If parables are about the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of God is about a place that people search for you and never stop until they find you, if the kingdom of God is about when you've gone astray the wrong way and you come back and you're loved in ways you've never imagined you'd be loved, and your Father wants to celebrate it, and to celebrate it, he needs the rest of the neighborhood to do that. The fatted calf was not just there for 2 or 3 people. It was there for the neighborhood. So, what sticks out for you in this parable? Any comments? See, when we used to have Bible study close, I could look in your eyes and you'd respond. And now I can't even see your face. So, Craig, what speaks to you in this parable?
Well, I concur with you that the image that's most vivid for me is, and I've preached on this before too, is that just that whole image of the Father. And I've often said that I kind of envision this being out on the, I don't know, out in the foothills of the mountain ranges of Wyoming or Montana. And I kind of see this ranch house with this big, huge porch on the front, you know, overlooking the vista, and there's this road coming in, you know, and I see this Father, you know, sitting on the porch, just looking down the road, and just that whole image of him running out there to greet him, you know, with open arms. And for me, that's always been the most significant part of this story. That there's just, you know, there's no questions asked. It's just you're back, and that's the most important thing.
So have you ever felt welcomed like that by anybody in your life growing up? You're nodding your head, I think. You want to tell us about it?
We've been away from parents for a long time, and we come home for Christmas or Easter, they would welcome us, and the same with us now. When we see our children, as little as we do, it's, it's pretty strong and emotional to see them and welcome them back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? I have to tell you, when I worked on this study for this, I think about my Grandpa Fisher and my dad so often, of the moments and times they welcomed me. My grandpa, I got to thinking a lot about him this week, because on my Sirius radio they have this holiday hymns that they sing all day long, and they were singing "O Holy Night," and my grandfather was a cheesemaker, and they had Christmas Eve service, and they always had to have it in the evening so he could be there after, because he had a great tenor voice, and he sang "O Holy Night." And every time I hear that song, I think of him, and this parable makes me think of him. He had diabetes, and he had both legs amputated, and while he had one leg amputated, he was a great fisherman. He taught me how to fly fish, and we would go to northern Wisconsin around Hayward for vacation, and always take Grandpa and Grandma with us. And we had to carry Grandpa to the boat because of his leg and strap him into the seat. And for Christmas, we never had much money as a family, but this one Christmas I remember my dad saying, "We're going to sacrifice what we're going to give all to you because we want to buy Grandpa this special fly rod that he's always wanted." So he's out there fishing his fly rod, and I said, "That's really nice." He said, "Well, why don't you try it?" So I try it, and I flip it back, as fast as I can. I get the line caught on a birch tree, and being this crazy football player that I am, I think power does everything. So I pull and whack, and I broke the fly rod. I could have gone between the cracks in the boat to the water. And I felt so bad. And the next morning I got up and I went out on the dock early in the morning. I was sitting there thinking about what I had done wrong and what that must have meant to my grandfather and my older brother, who always seemed to be there for me, came out and said, "Well, that's not too bad." Pretty soon, my other brother is wheeling my grandpa out in a wheelchair. "What's all this sadness about out here? Come and put me in the car. We got to go buy a new fly rod. We can't sit here and mourn the fish or just rejoicing that we're not fishing. Let's get going." And I've always thought of that as that's kind of how a forgiving person he was, to all of that. And I don't know why it is. I think it's because Christmas is getting close. I often think about my dad and all the stuff that he did. I try to analyze why he had such a compassionate heart, and I think it was, I may have told you this story, he was from a family of 16, and he was about the last third of them. When he was in junior high, his father, who was an alcoholic, left Grandma with the rest of the kids. And so what had to happen is the younger ones had to be farmed out. So he went and lived with Ansel, his second cousin, worked on the farm, and I think it was not, the stories I hear, it was really tough living to see where that was. But he made it through high school, and he made it through 2 years of county normal, and ended up getting married. But I think he always had his soft spot for people who were disadvantaged. So that at Christmas time, he ran the penny store. Christmas Eve, any of the stuff that wasn't sold, they said you could discount. The company told him he could for after Christmas. So he discounted it on Christmas Eve, and we went to a number of houses where there were kids that didn't have anything and gave it to them. And I can remember every every Sunday we went over to pick up Mrs. Lusk. She was a widow. I think she looked a little bit like my grandma. I think my dad thought he was going over to pick up his mom to take her to church. And then, of course, we had to mow her lawn for her. That's part of our problem, our gift that we got. And we always had to shovel snow for her. And when it was a cold morning, colder than this in Wisconsin, we'd have to get out of the car and go and help her into the car. But it's the things he did for other people, the teachers he helped, and all those things. I think somewhere he got the prodigal son into him, you know. Somewhere he got an understanding of the grace of God, you know. So I think it's okay at Christmas time to, like you're going to remember your family getting together. I think it's all kinds of, I think it's important for us to be, because you think, I believe this, that when you put memory to hope, they belong together. You remember all of the things that God has done, and that creates hope for you for the future. You remember all the moments you have loved your children, and that gives you something substantial in your life as you move on. Do this in remembrance of me, he says at the Lord's Supper. And when we remember what he has done for us, hope comes alive in us, and light overcomes darkness, and love overcomes hate, and grace overcomes unacceptance to see where we are. Anyone else got any other questions or comments? I put it in my file. If you have a file in your faith memory in your head, put it near the front of the file, this business of the prodigal son. Just like I have John 3:16 up there and the 23rd Psalm. I think the 23rd Psalm reminds me of this a little bit. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. I think when I die, it's like this aisle. Jesus is at the other end, and I start down there to that. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. When I go from this time, from this world to the next, he's going to take me with him. I even kind of think he might be running towards me, because he knows sometimes how I waver and I may want to step back and not come. But he'll still be there to pull me forward. Well, we got a couple weeks off. We have Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and then we'll start back up with the parables in January. We'll start out with the rich man and Lazarus. After you get through celebrating Christmas and the 12 days of Christmas and Epiphany and all of those wonderful things. Thanks for coming. Let's have a word of prayer, can we? Dear Father in heaven, we're so grateful that you are the one who never leaves us alone. You come to search us out. You come to find us. Your love and your grace and your forgiveness and your acceptance always is coming towards us. And you are always out in front of us, calling us forward. We pray in a special way for all of those who have lost loved ones through this terrible, terrible time of COVID. And for those who are suffering now, God, give us the courage to be your witness and finds our places and times in this world to bring your love and your grace and your forgiveness to one another as you have brought us to us. And now let us pray the way you taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory. Amen. Stay safe, folks.